You think you know what betrayal feels like? Try sitting in a room full of people you once called family while your ex-wife and your kids show everyone a documentary about how you supposedly ruined their lives. I was the bad guy before I even had a chance to speak. But this isn't the story Melissa wanted. This is the story of what really happened, what I lost, and how I fought back when everyone thought I was finished. If you're looking for a neat ending, turn back now. I never expected to become the star of my own horror story. 7 weeks ago, I was just another guy working overtime in Minneapolis, trying to survive divorce and layoffs, thinking the worst days were behind me. My name's Tyler, and 3 years back, after 15 years of marriage, my world collapsed in a way I didn't think possible. Melissa and I started out like any couple. We met in college, married in our 20s, and bought a house just south of the city. We had 2 boys, Carter and Logan, and I thought that if I worked hard enough, we'd always be okay. I didn't see the cracks forming until Melissa's mom got sick. Cancer took her fast, and that was when the ground gave out. I was working ridiculous hours as my company fired people left and right, just hoping to keep our house. I drive Melissa's mom to chemo at dawn, then rush to the job site and put in 12-hour days. I barely slept. I missed dinner after dinner, school event after school event. Melissa said I was never there, and she was right, but I didn't have another move. By the time her mom died, I was a zombie. 6 months later, Melissa served me divorce papers. No yelling, just a silent look that told me this was all my fault. We agreed to joint custody, but it was just ink on paper. Carter and Logan started skipping my weekends almost immediately. They'd text that something came up, a friend's birthday, a late game. I tried not to beg, but every time they canceled, I felt something inside me get smaller. When they did show up, they'd sit in silence, tapping on their phones, treating my apartment like a waiting room. The last time Carter actually talked to me, he asked for money, not advice. Father's Day hit, and I hadn't seen them in 2 months. Melissa sent a text. The boys want dinner with you at DeLuca's, downtown, Sunday night. She said they wanted to reconnect. For the first time in ages, I let myself feel a sliver of hope. I pictured us talking like a family again, maybe getting past the years of resentment. I showed up right on time, but the scene in the private room was a nightmare. Melissa's parents, her sister and brother-in-law, 2 couples I barely recognized. All there, all staring at me. Melissa looked smug. Carter and Logan looked scared, but determined. The air felt toxic before I even sat down. We ordered. Nobody spoke. I tried asking Logan about school, but he stared at his plate. Melissa gave me a smile I'd seen 100 times. The smile she used when she wanted something to hurt. Then Carter stood up, cleared his throat, and said he and Logan had something to show everyone. The waiter plugged in a laptop. The projector flashed to life. Title card, The Man Who Broke Our Family. A story by Carter and Logan. The video started with Melissa looking straight at the camera, her voice even, almost bored. She talked about marrying a man who was never there. She called me a disappointment. Then Carter and Logan, speaking like strangers, listed every event I'd missed. Photos flashed, empty chair at a birthday, me absent from the bleachers at Carter's game. The video cut to a list called Broken Promises, Paris, Yellowstone, a new bike. Things I never promised because we never had the money. The worst part was the ending. Carter and Logan calling my phone, filming my voicemail, showing my missed calls while sad piano music played. No mention that I was working double shifts or that I'd paid for every bill they had. When the video ended, nobody moved. Melissa's father raised his glass and toasted Carter and Logan's courage. The room erupted in applause. I felt something break in my chest. Melissa's sister started laughing. I got up, told everyone thank you for their honesty, and walked out before I lost it completely. I don't remember driving home. I turned off my phone, closed the blinds, and sat in the dark for hours, replaying the video in my head. I called in sick for the first time in 2 years. For 3 days, I didn't eat, didn't answer calls, didn't move. On the 4th day, I finally turned my phone on. Messages poured in. Melissa, the boys, people from that dinner. Melissa started angry, calling me childish for ignoring my sons, then flipped to panicked, asking about Carter's tuition payment. The boys sent identical texts, saying they wanted to talk about next year's plans. That's when I got suspicious. I logged into the boys' college fund, the one I'd been growing for 3 years. It was empty. Over $115,000 gone. Withdrawn 2 months ago with my forged signature. I called the bank. Melissa told them it was for an education emergency. The money had gone straight to paying off her credit card. I checked my support payments. Melissa had changed the account, redirected the funds to some new place, forging my name again. That was the moment everything snapped. It was never about family. It was about draining me dry and leaving me to rot. For once, I wasn't going to let it happen. When the shock wore off, I found a new kind of anger, sharper than anything I'd felt before. Melissa and the boys didn't just want to humiliate me. They wanted to erase me, gut my bank account, and leave me with nothing but blame. I knew if I caved now, it would never stop. This wasn't about tuition or the boys' future. This was about control, about making sure Melissa's story was the only one anyone ever heard. First, I stopped replying to any messages. Instead, I started gathering everything I had: bank statements, emails, text messages, anything that showed what I'd actually done since the divorce. I reached out to an old friend from high school who now worked as a private investigator in St. Paul. I told him I needed proof. Proof that Melissa was lying. Proof that my sons were being used as weapons. He didn't ask questions. Within 3 days, he'd sent me screenshots from Melissa's social media and her so-called support groups. There she was, posting pictures of Miami weekends, bottle service in Chicago, new clothes, fancy dinners with hashtags like self-care and single mom life. The captions made it sound like she was a martyr, scraping by on crumbs, while I was some monster hiding from responsibility. Meanwhile, I was eating instant noodles for dinner and hoping my old car made it through the winter. I started comparing calendars, one from the boys' school, another the one Melissa shared with me. The official school calendar was filled with events I never even knew existed. Logan's debate finals, Carter's science awards, parent-teacher nights that were always during my work hours. I scrolled through my old emails and found nothing, no invites, no reminders. Melissa had been systematically editing out events and hiding them from me, then turning around and telling everyone I was too selfish to show up. The private investigator even found posts in a Facebook group where Melissa bragged about keeping him out of the loop. I realized this was bigger than just missed visits. She'd made sure the only version of me the boys ever saw was the one she created: cold, distracted, and uncaring. I decided it was time to confront the truth, and I wasn't going to do it by text. I sent a calendar invite to Melissa, Carter, and Logan. I picked a tiny coffee shop near my apartment, neutral ground, nothing fancy. When the day came, I was sure they wouldn't show, but all three walked in together. Melissa looked anxious, her eyes darting everywhere except at me. The boys tried to look tough, but they couldn't quite hold it. I could see Logan's hands shaking. I waited for the small talk, the fake smiles, but nobody said a word. I took 3 thick folders from my bag and put them on the table, one for each of them. I told them I wanted them to see exactly what I'd done since the divorce. Inside were printouts of every support payment, every tuition check, receipts for gifts and clothes, statements for the college fund. Everything, even screenshots from Melissa's Instagram, her trips, her shopping sprees, all paid for with money meant for the boys' future. As they flipped through the pages, I watched their faces change. Carter looked up at his mom like he was seeing her for the first time in his life. Logan wouldn't meet my eyes at all. Melissa tried to snatch the folders away, saying this was just me trying to turn the boys against her. I held my ground. I said the days of me paying extra, covering everything above and beyond the court order, were finished. From now on, every payment would go directly to the school, and every expense would need a receipt. Carter started to argue. He said I was punishing him for expressing his truth in that video. I didn't yell. I asked him if he really believed I hadn't been there for them, or if he'd just never seen the other side. When he got flustered and quiet, I pulled out my phone and showed them call logs. Every time they called me on camera, it was during a scheduled meeting or a day I'd already told them I couldn't pick up. I showed them the 2 calendars, the real one and the edited one Melissa sent me. I showed them emails I'd sent the school, asking to be informed about events, and the counselor's replies, apologizing for the confusion. Logan started to cry, but it wasn't the kind of crying that wants sympathy. It was that raw, silent kind that only comes when you realize you've been lied to by someone you trusted. Melissa lost it. She accused me of trying to destroy her life, of manipulating the boys, of refusing to accept my failures. I stayed calm and said I wasn't interested in her opinion. I told her this wasn't about the past. It was about moving forward without lies. I picked up my things and left, but before I walked out, I told the boys my door was always open and I'd never stopped loving them. They didn't follow me out. I didn't expect them to. That night, I didn't sleep. I put together a digital folder with every screenshot, every receipt, every piece of proof I had. I sent it to Melissa's parents, her sister, the 2 couples from that dinner, and most importantly, to the 3 people who had invested money in Melissa's side business, one that, I now realized, was nothing but a front for her spending. I titled the folder, the truth about Tyler. I didn't add commentary or make accusations. I let the evidence speak. Within hours, my phone blew up. Melissa's father left a voicemail, stuttering through an apology, admitting he never asked for my side. Her business partners called demanding answers. I told them to talk to Melissa. The fallout hit fast. Melissa's social circle closed ranks, but most of them wanted their money back. Her side business collapsed. She started leaving desperate voicemails on my phone, switching from pleading to threatening and back again. At school, the administration called me in. The head counselor looked embarrassed as she admitted they believed everything Melissa had said. I showed them the evidence. They apologized and promised to keep me in the loop from now on. I called the summer program Carter wanted to attend and learned Melissa had already given them my credit card number, claiming I'd pay for everything. I canceled the card before she could rack up more debt. The next week, I got a call from Carter. He didn't ask for money. He asked if he and Logan could come over, just to talk. No mention of Melissa, no demands. I said yes, but set ground rules. No phones, no recordings, just us. When they arrived, they looked smaller than I remembered, tired and lost. We sat in my tiny living room, surrounded by moving boxes and old family photos. Carter said he didn't know what to believe anymore. Logan asked if I'd really missed all those events because I didn't care. I showed them emails, calendar invites, text messages. I told them about working those endless hours, about my fear of losing everything during the layoffs. I said I should have fought harder, but I never stopped loving them. I promised them that from now on, I'd fight for my side of the story, no matter what it took. They left that night without promising to come back, but it felt like the first honest conversation we'd had in years. I didn't hear from them for a few days, but the silence felt different. Melissa tried calling again, this time showing up at my job, causing a scene in the lobby. She was desperate. Her business partners were threatening to sue, her parents were demanding answers, and her social circle was shrinking by the day. She begged me to tell everyone it was a misunderstanding. She said she was losing everything. I looked her in the eye and told her she'd brought it on herself. She started to cry, but I walked away. A week later, a letter arrived from her lawyer, accusing me of financial abuse for refusing to pay above the court order. I sent my lawyer everything. He laughed and said Melissa had no case. The school called to say Melissa hadn't paid the last tuition bill, even though I'd given her the money months ago. I paid the school directly. That night, Carter texted to say he wanted to see some old family photos. When he and Logan came over, I pulled out a dusty album and let them flip through. They stopped at a photo of Carter in the hospital after he was born, me holding him, time-stamped minutes after his birth. Melissa had told him I'd missed it. Logan just stared at the picture. Carter was quiet for a long time. They left with the album, saying they needed to talk to their mom. Melissa's world was crumbling. Her business partners filed a lawsuit, the house went into foreclosure, and her parents took her in after a breakdown. She tried to move the boys to a new school, but the administration refused without my signature. The lies were finally catching up, and for once, I wasn't the only one paying the price. By the middle of July, it was like I'd crossed a line where nothing shocked me anymore, and I was simply waiting for the next betrayal to crawl out of the shadows. The boys drifted between my small apartment and Melissa's parents' spare room, carrying their lives in old duffel bags, never really landing anywhere for long. I could see them wrestling with two versions of reality, Melissa's version, where I was the villain in every story, and the new one I'd started piecing together for them with every photo, letter, and receipt. Carter was always more guarded, carrying himself like someone who'd been betrayed by his own memory, while Logan just looked tired, older than a 13-year-old should. I kept things stripped to the basics whenever they stayed with me. There were no lectures, no loaded questions, and never any guilt trips about who they chose to believe. Instead, we spent long evenings eating pizza and playing old board games, talking about school or movies or nothing at all. Sometimes, I'd catch Logan watching me out of the corner of his eye, maybe waiting for me to explode, but I never did. I told them the truth when they asked about anything, even the painful parts. Anger had left me months ago, replaced by this strange, clear sense of duty to give them honesty even if it hurt. Carter finally broke his silence the night he found an old birthday card I'd written, one Melissa told him he'd never received. He sat with that card for a long time, then looked up and asked me if I'd ever stopped loving them. I told him I never had, and his eyes said he believed me, at least for that moment. While I tried to hold my boys together, Melissa was dissolving in real time. Her calls became unpredictable and frantic, veering from sobbing apologies to accusations that I'd destroyed her life and poisoned the boys. She started losing friends faster than she lost sleep, as word spread about the business money she'd siphoned and the lies she'd spun. Her business partners, who'd invested real money into her wellness company, hired an attorney and began demanding bank statements. What they found, fraud, forged signatures, missing funds, was enough to threaten her with criminal charges if she didn't pay them back. Melissa's father, always stubborn, finally called me, his voice shaky and low. He said he was sorry for believing her version without asking for mine, and admitted the family was considering getting Melissa professional help. I thanked him, but there wasn't much left to say. That's when the identity theft started. Out of nowhere, I began getting letters from banks in places I'd never even visited. One from Des Moines, one from a credit union in Chicago, each telling me I'd been denied for a loan I never applied for. I realized quickly that Melissa was behind it, using my social security number, forging my signature, trying to grab whatever money she could as her world closed in. I spent a weekend locked inside with a pile of paperwork, freezing my credit, calling banks, and making a full report to the police. The detective I spoke to sounded tired but sympathetic. He told me I was far from the first ex-husband to call in with this kind of story, and probably wouldn't be the last. Things went from bad to worse when Melissa tried to move the boys to Milwaukee without my knowledge. She forged a permission letter, submitted it to the boys' school, and tried to get them packed up before I could intervene. The school flagged the paperwork. Someone there finally realized my signature looked nothing like the real thing. I drove over in a panic, finding Carter waiting on the porch with a packed bag and Logan crying in the back seat of Melissa's car. Melissa was shouting at her father in the driveway, insisting I'd abandon them all. I told the boys to grab their things and come with me. For the first time, neither argued or hesitated. The mood changed at home almost instantly. Carter confessed that he'd felt pressured to repeat Melissa's stories for years, pressured to say I was never there, to participate in that documentary, to ask for money every time they visited. He admitted some stories were exaggerated, others complete inventions, but he'd gone along because he was terrified of losing Melissa's approval. Logan broke down in tears and told me how Melissa would rehearse what they should say before every visit, always telling them I'd never cared and never would. The truth spilled out in fragments, painful, ugly, but necessary. I didn't judge. I just listened, realizing how deep Melissa's manipulation had gone and how hard it would be for the boys to unlearn all the poison. Meanwhile, the legal fallout crashed down on Melissa like a collapsing building. Her business partners filed a fraud claim, her parents stopped bailing her out, and she lost her house after defaulting on the mortgage. She moved into a dingy rental and spent her days posting wild rants on social media, blaming everyone except herself. My lawyer compiled everything: voicemails, emails, social media tirades, all evidence for the judge. Carter and Logan, with the help of a school counselor, officially asked to stay with me for the rest of the year. The judge granted temporary custody, and Melissa lost it completely, sending daily emails alternating between threats and desperate pleas. She accused me of turning the boys into traitors and demanded I fix things with her family and her ex-friends. Every new message just made my case stronger. The day of the final hearing, the air in the courthouse felt electric and stifling at the same time. Melissa looked hollowed out, her hands trembling as she faced the judge. To my surprise, she admitted everything: every forgery, every lie, every theft. Her confession was messy and tearful, but for the first time, I saw something real in her: regret, or maybe just exhaustion. The judge gave me full custody, ordered Melissa to begin therapy, and forced her to pay restitution for the college fund and the loans. When we walked out of court, Carter and Logan both hugged me tight. For the first time since all this began, I believed we could finally heal. That night, when the apartment was finally quiet, I got a call from a Chicago law office. The voice on the line belonged to a paralegal representing Melissa's cousin Samantha, a woman I'd never met. She told me Samantha had also been scammed by Melissa years ago: hospital bills faked, money borrowed under false pretenses, a pattern that stretched back further than I ever imagined. "You're not her only victim," she said softly. My story, it turned out, was just the latest in a long chain of destruction. I sat at my kitchen table in the dark, listening to the boys sleeping down the hall, feeling both victorious and uneasy. The worst seemed over, but part of me knew there would always be another secret, another consequence waiting around the next corner. Still, for the first time in years, I could breathe, could start to imagine a life where I wasn't just someone's villain or scapegoat. I could finally start to be a father again. The story wasn't finished, but at least now, I was finally the one telling it. After the hearing, you might think the tension would just fade away, but it didn't work like that. My nerves were still on edge, my sleep still light and full of half-dreams where the phone was always ringing or a letter from another lawyer was sliding under my door. Carter and Logan moved into my apartment full-time, bringing only the basics, school backpacks, a few clothes, and that battered family photo album they'd clung to for weeks. The place was cramped, but I never heard either of them complain, and it felt almost peaceful in the evenings, a quiet that had nothing to do with silence and everything to do with relief. I tried to keep things normal for them, or as close to normal as anything could be after the months we'd survived. We set up a routine that didn't revolve around fear or secrets. We'd eat dinner together, usually something cheap and quick. Then Carter would plug in his headphones to finish homework, while Logan flipped through old magazines or practiced guitar in the bedroom. On weekends, we took long walks by the river, talking about nothing in particular. Sometimes, the boys would ask me about the divorce, or about the years they'd spent believing stories that had never been true. I answered every question honestly, even when it meant admitting I should have fought harder for them from the very start. Melissa's presence didn't disappear just because she'd lost in court. Her parents did their best to support her, but their patience was thin and the money was gone. She called the boys at first, sometimes apologetic and sometimes furious, always blaming someone else for her downfall. Carter learned to keep conversations short and neutral, while Logan avoided most calls altogether. I told them they never had to answer if they didn't want to, that their lives didn't belong to anyone else anymore. The biggest change wasn't what we talked about, it was the lack of secrets and lies. For once, everything fell out in the open, nothing hidden behind rehearsed lines or carefully edited calendars. The fallout from Melissa's choices spread like wildfire through the rest of her life. Her former business partners managed to recover some of their investment by selling off what was left of her wellness company, but not without plenty of bad blood and a few public accusations that made their way into the local paper. The house she'd lost was eventually repossessed, her credit ruined, and her social circle all but vanished overnight. One by one, the people who'd once clapped for that family documentary sent Carter and Logan awkward, embarrassed messages, some apologies, some excuses, none of them really enough to undo the damage. I worried constantly about the boys and how they'd process everything. Carter, always the more analytical one, threw himself into a film class at school, planning a new project about rebuilding trust and honesty after family breakdown. Logan started spending more time with his old friends, sometimes inviting them over, relieved, I think, to have a space where nobody expected him to perform or choose sides. We spent a few evenings talking about boundaries, about how to recognize manipulation, about how to ask for help when things got heavy. I was careful never to badmouth Melissa. I told them her actions had consequences, but she'd always be their mother, and I'd support their relationship with her as long as it was safe and healthy. One day, Carter came home with a letter from Melissa. She'd been accepted into a treatment program for anxiety and depression and wanted the boys to visit. I didn't know what to think, and neither did they. After some discussion, we agreed to meet her at a neutral place, a small cafe near the hospital where she was staying. Melissa looked tired, older, but less defensive than I remembered. She apologized for her actions, though the words came out tangled and raw. She told Carter and Logan she'd made mistakes and hoped to earn their trust again, but didn't try to rewrite the past or make excuses. The boys were cautious but polite, unsure whether to believe her or brace for more disappointment. I watched them navigate this conversation, proud of how much they'd grown since the beginning of the year. As weeks passed, life settled into something almost resembling stability. The three of us moved into a slightly bigger apartment near their school, still small, but with enough space that everyone had their own corner to breathe. I paid tuition directly to the school now, never through anyone else, and the financial boundaries I set stayed firm. Melissa's parents came by from time to time, dropping off groceries or helping with rides, their relationship with me tentative but slowly improving as they saw the boys doing better. Logan started sleeping through the night again. Carter even laughed at one of my terrible jokes during dinner, a moment I wished I could bottle and keep forever. Still, there were moments when the past threatened to claw its way back. Melissa's creditors occasionally called me by mistake, looking for payment or information, and I learned to block numbers without even a flicker of guilt. A few former friends resurfaced, asking how things were going, and I realized I had nothing left to prove or explain to anyone outside my little family. Carter's film project started taking shape, and he asked if he could interview me. Just a conversation, he promised, not an interrogation. I agreed, wanting him to have every piece of the truth, no matter how unflattering. The most unexpected part was how quickly the boys started to recover once the drama died down. Logan's grades climbed. Carter stopped jumping every time the phone rang, and both of them started making plans for the summer that didn't involve Melissa's permission or approval. We started a new Saturday morning ritual: pancakes and a walk by the lake, rain or shine. Some days, it almost felt like we were building something better than what we'd lost. But healing is never a straight line. There were setbacks. Melissa's progress in treatment was uneven, and she sometimes slipped back into old patterns, overpromising, blaming, pleading for forgiveness, then lashing out when she didn't get it right away. I stayed consistent, always responding through the parenting app, never letting emotion drive the conversation. The boys noticed, and slowly, their trust in me solidified. It didn't matter that we lived in a small apartment or that our lives looked nothing like they had before the divorce. What mattered was that, for the first time in years, they didn't have to wonder who would show up for them. I did, every single day. There's a long road ahead. I don't kid myself about how deep the scars run or how easy it would be for old wounds to reopen. But every night, as I turn out the lights and listen to my sons laughing in the next room, I realize we survived something that was meant to break us. We're not perfect, but we're still standing. And for now, that's enough. If you told me a year ago that peace was possible, I would have laughed in your face and walked away. Now, with summer winding down and school starting soon, I can finally breathe most nights, though sometimes my heart still pounds at every unexpected call or knock at the door. The boys are getting used to the new rhythm. Their lives no longer ruled by secrets or surprise demands, but I know there are scars under the surface, old wounds that flare up if someone mentions Melissa's name or the word documentary. Carter's film class turned his pain into purpose, and his project about rebuilding trust after betrayal earned him a spot in a citywide youth festival. He interviewed Logan, me, even Melissa's parents, but refused to film Melissa herself, saying he wasn't ready for more performances or half-truths. One Thursday afternoon, as Logan and I walked home from the grocery store, I noticed an envelope wedged into our mailbox, no return address, and my name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph, Melissa as a teenager, standing beside a woman who looked enough like her to be her twin. The letter was short, just a handful of sentences, but the words hit me harder than any legal threat or accusation. You don't know half the story. Ask Melissa about Madison. She'll understand. I turned the photograph over and saw a date. August 2000, Chicago. I slipped it into my pocket, not wanting the boys to see my hands trembling or the sudden chill crawling up my neck. That night, I lay awake staring at the photo, replaying every conversation I'd ever had with Melissa, every time she dodged questions about her past or changed the subject when old friends were mentioned. For years, I'd accepted the version of her history she wanted me to know. Only child, no real family after her mother died, a string of failed friendships and jobs before we met in college. Now, holding that photo, I realized there had always been shadows at the edges of her stories, details that never quite added up but seemed harmless at the time. Carter noticed my distraction at breakfast, asking if something was wrong. I told him nothing, but Logan shot me a look that said he wasn't fooled. A few days later, Melissa requested a meeting. She said her therapist encouraged her to try answering questions she'd avoided in the past. We met at a quiet coffee shop, just the two of us, sitting by the window as the rain hammered the street outside. I handed her the photo and the letter without saying a word. For a long time, Melissa just stared at the image, her hands clenched so tight her knuckles went white. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, almost robotic. She told me that Madison was her older sister, a person she'd never mentioned because the pain was too raw and dangerous. Madison, she said, had disappeared when Melissa was a teenager, gone without a trace after a family fight that turned violent, and never heard from again. Melissa admitted she'd spent years haunted by what happened, blaming herself, blaming her parents, blaming everyone but the truth. She confessed that everything she did to me, the lies, the manipulation, the need for control, had roots tangled deep in that trauma, growing wild and unchecked in her mind. She told me the real reason she forged my signature and drained the boys' college fund wasn't greed, but a desperate attempt to erase the fear of abandonment that had ruled her since childhood. I listened, unsure whether to believe any of it, or if this was just another version of the truth designed to soften her image. For the first time, though, I saw her not as a villain but as someone genuinely lost, a person who'd been running from herself for longer than I'd even known her. After the meeting, I felt strange, less angry, more tired, carrying a sadness I couldn't shake. I debated telling Carter and Logan about Madison, about their mother's secret sister, but something held me back. I decided to wait until the boys were ready, knowing that some truths, once revealed, can't ever be taken back or explained away. Over the next few weeks, life crept back toward normal. Carter's film played at the festival to a standing ovation, and he told me afterward that the only part that mattered was seeing his family in the audience, smiling and unafraid. Logan joined the soccer team, found new friends, and seemed to leave the worst memories behind like last year's school books, sometimes glancing back, but never turning around for long. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday night, as we were finishing dinner, the doorbell rang. Carter opened the door to a woman about Melissa's age, with the same dark hair and nervous posture, clutching a worn duffel bag and a folder of legal documents. She introduced herself as Madison and said she'd come to set things right. The world seemed to tilt sideways as I listened to her explain that she'd been hiding in plain sight for decades, using a different last name, keeping tabs on Melissa through online breadcrumbs and distant relatives. Madison told me the story that Melissa never could, the real story of their childhood, of a family torn apart by secrets, violence, and cover-ups that stretched back generations. In the weeks that followed, Carter and Logan listened as Madison filled in the blanks, connecting the dots that Melissa had always left blurry or erased completely. The boys learned about resilience and forgiveness in a way no court order or therapy session could have taught. Melissa, for her part, began real work in therapy, facing her past for the first time. She never asked for sympathy and never offered excuses again, just quiet determination to do better for the people she'd hurt. As autumn arrived, our little family took shape around a new kind of honesty, one with jagged edges and open wounds, but also laughter, late-night talks, and a sense that nothing was too broken to repair. Carter started working on a new film, this time with Madison's help, focused on truth and the power of second chances. Logan asked if he could invite both his mom and Madison to his next game. And when I saw them sitting side by side in the bleachers, cheering together, I realized that for the first time in years, we weren't running anymore. I can't claim the ending is perfect, or that every scar has healed, but the nightmare that started with a dinner and a documentary finally feels finished. Our story is still being written, messy, real, sometimes beautiful, and finally ours.